Nightfall in the 1990s felt different. Fantasy wasn't yet polished into cinematic universes or filtered through endless CGI gloss. It was grimy, practical, stitched together with smoke machines, prosthetics, candlelight, and ambition. Studios gambled on strange ideas, fallen angels in trench coats, haunted cities, cursed bloodlines, mythic quests drenched in shadow. Some were too weird to market. Some were overshadowed by bigger blockbusters. Others confused audiences expecting straightforward fairy tales. But time has been kind to these darker visions. Rewatching them now feels like opening a forbidden storybook tucked away in a dusty attic. The effects may show their age, yet the atmosphere lingers longer than modern spectacle ever could. These films dared to blend horror with myth, romance with dread, philosophy with monsters. They built worlds that felt dangerous rather than theme park safe. Tonight is the perfect night to step back into that shadowy decade and rediscover 10 forgotten 90s dark fantasy films worth watching.
The Crow, 1994. Rain never seems to stop falling in The Crow. Released in 1994, this gothic revenge fantasy unfolds in a decaying city where love survives even death. Brandon Lee delivers a haunting performance as Eric Draven, a murdered musician resurrected by a mystical crow to avenge his fiancée. The film blends comic book stylization with industrial gloom, creating a world soaked in candlelight and electric guitars. Practical effects and miniatures give the city a tangible weight that modern green screen rarely matches. Tragedy off-screen deepened its legacy, casting a permanent shadow over its release. Yet beyond the mythology lies an aching romance and a meditation on grief. Violence here feels poetic rather than triumphant. The soundtrack pulses with 90s alternative energy, amplifying its melancholic tone. Hollywood rarely allows superhero stories to feel this mournful or intimate. Decades later, its atmosphere remains hypnotic and strangely beautiful to revisit tonight.
Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992. When Bram Stoker's Dracula premiered in 1992, audiences expected a traditional Gothic romance. What they received was operatic excess wrapped in crimson velvet. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola, the film rejects subtlety in favor of theatrical grandeur. Gary Oldman transforms into a tragic, monstrous count driven by eternal longing. Practical effects dominate, from in-camera transitions to elaborate costumes that feel alive. Winona Ryder and Anthony Hopkins add intensity to a world teetering between romance and nightmare. The film embraces sensuality and horror equally, refusing to dilute either. Shadows crawl across walls like living things, reminding viewers that imagination once replaced digital shortcuts. Though initially divisive, it is aged into a lavish fever dream of obsession. Few modern studio fantasies would risk such stylized melodrama. Tonight, it plays like dark poetry soaked in blood and candlelight.
Sleepy Hollow, 1999. Sleepy Hollow closed the decade in 1999 with fog rolling across haunted woods. Directed by Tim Burton, the film transforms Washington Irving's tale into Baroque horror fantasy. Johnny Depp plays Ichabod Crane not as a fearless hero, but as a nervous investigator relying on science in a superstitious village. Practical sets built in England give the town a storybook eeriness, while Christopher Walken's Headless Horseman radiates brutal menace. The color palette bleeds with silvers and deep reds, enhancing its gothic mood. Danny Elfman's score swells like a tragic waltz. Though commercially successful, it is often overshadowed by louder blockbusters from the same era. Beneath the spectacle lies a surprisingly grim fairy tale about faith and fear. Burton's commitment to atmosphere over realism makes it linger long after the credits. It remains a deliciously macabre fantasy, perfect for a stormy evening tonight.
The Devil's Advocate, 1997. The Devil's Advocate slithered into theaters in 1997, wearing the disguise of a legal thriller. Beneath tailored suits and Manhattan skylines lurks pure supernatural temptation. Keanu Reeves plays an ambitious attorney seduced by power, while Al Pacino revels in theatrical wickedness as a charismatic law firm head who may be Satan himself. The film leans into biblical symbolism and psychological decay, turning corporate ambition into damnation. Charlize Theron adds tragic vulnerability as innocence erodes under unseen forces. Lavish production design and practical effects heighten the surreal final act. It explores pride and corruption through a distinctly 90s lens of excess. Modern studios might streamline its operatic monologues, yet those indulgent speeches give it personality. Dark fantasy here hides within glass towers rather than castles. Rewatching it reveals a morality play dressed as glossy drama, daring viewers to question temptation tonight.
Dark City, 1998. Dark City arrived in 1998 and vanished beneath louder science fiction spectacles, yet its vision feels more daring with time. Directed by Alex Proyas, the film traps its characters in a metropolis permanently shrouded in night. Rufus Sewell plays a man accused of murder who discovers reality itself is being manipulated by pale, whispering beings known as the Strangers. The architecture shifts, memories rewrite, and identity becomes fluid. Built largely on practical sets, the city feels oppressive and labyrinthine, blending noir shadows with existential dread. Kiefer Sutherland adds nervous intensity as a scientist complicit in cosmic tampering. Themes of free will and manufactured lives echo louder in today's digital age. Its philosophical weight and stylized gloom make it more unsettling than explosive. This is dark fantasy disguised as science fiction, a fever dream about control that rewards patient viewers seeking something richer tonight.
The City of Lost Children, 1995. Released in 1995, The City of Lost Children feels like a nightmare illustrated by candlelight. Directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet and Marc Caro, it tells of a mad scientist who kidnaps children to steal their dreams. Ron Perlman anchors the chaos as a gentle, strong man searching for his stolen brother. The production design overwhelms the senses with rusted machinery, fog-drenched docks, and grotesque inventions that feel handcrafted rather than rendered. Every corridor drips with surreal menace. The film balances fairy tale innocence with grotesque horror, creating an atmosphere both whimsical and deeply disturbing. Its visual imagination influenced later fantasy films, yet it never achieved mainstream dominance outside Europe. Dialogue often feels secondary to mood, allowing images to carry emotional weight. Watching it now is like opening a mechanical music box filled with shadows, proving dark fantasy can be strange, poetic, and unforgettable tonight.
Interview with the Vampire, 1994. Interview with the Vampire arrived in 1994, cloaked in candlelight and sorrow. Based on Anne Rice's novel, the film chronicles centuries of immortality through the haunted narration of Louis. Brad Pitt portrays him with aching melancholy, while Tom Cruise surprises skeptics as the flamboyant, ruthless Lestat. Directed by Neil Jordan, the production favors lavish practical sets and richly textured costumes. The vampire myth becomes less about terror and more about existential despair. Young Kirsten Dunst adds chilling complexity as a child trapped in eternal stasis. The film moves deliberately, allowing philosophy and longing to overshadow action. It dared to treat monsters as tragic romantics rather than simple villains. Though commercially successful, it is often overlooked in conversations about 90s fantasy. Tonight, its meditations on immortality and isolation feel hauntingly timeless and beautifully tragic.
Excalibur, 1981. Though released in 1981, Excalibur haunted 90s fantasy culture through constant rediscovery and influence. Directed by John Boorman, it presents Arthurian legend as myth soaked in mud and prophecy. Nigel Terry embodies King Arthur with tragic nobility, while Helen Mirren and Gabriel Byrne add mysticism and menace. The armor gleams unnaturally against dark forests, giving the film an otherworldly glow. Practical locations and operatic music create an atmosphere both primal and enchanted. Violence feels mythic rather than heroic, emphasizing destiny's cruelty. Its uncompromising tone kept it for mainstream family appeal, yet it influenced later fantasy aesthetics profoundly. The film treats legend as sacred and savage simultaneously. Watching it now feels like witnessing folklore carved into stone. It stands apart from sanitized medieval adventures, offering a raw vision of magic and mortality that still resonates powerfully tonight. The Ninth Gate, 1999. The Ninth Gate closed the decade in 1999 with quiet, creeping dread. Directed by Roman Polanski, it follows a rare book dealer drawn into a cult conspiracy. Johnny Depp underplays the role, wandering through European castles and dusty libraries in search of a text rumored to summon the devil. The horror unfolds subtly through symbols, engravings, and whispered secrets rather than explosive spectacle. Firelight and shadow dominate the cinematography, enhancing its scholarly menace. The film refuses to clarify whether supernatural forces are real or imagined, sustaining ambiguity until the final frame. Its deliberate pacing divided audiences craving over thrills, yet that restraint is precisely its strength. Dark fantasy here lives in knowledge and temptation, not monsters. Revisiting it reveals a cerebral occult mystery that rewards patience. Few modern studios would fund something this quietly sinister and ambiguous tonight.
Dark fantasy in the 1990s thrived on risk. These films embraced atmosphere over algorithms, practical craft over digital convenience, and melancholy over market research. Some stumbled at the box office, others were misunderstood or eclipsed by brighter spectacles, yet each carried a distinctive vision that refused to be diluted. They treated magic as dangerous, immortality as tragic, and temptation as seductive rather than cartoonish. Rewatching them now feels intimate, like uncovering secret chapters in genre history. The shadows feel thicker, the worlds feel handmade, the emotions linger longer than explosive climaxes. Modern fantasy often aims for universes. These films aimed for mood. Tonight offers a perfect excuse to dim the lights, silence distractions, and return to stories unafraid of gloom. Within their fog-drenched streets, cursed castles, and haunted souls lies a reminder that darkness can be beautiful, poetic, and daring. Some treasures simply wait patiently for rediscovery.